Buenos días. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the city of Wilmington to this year's first session of the Joint Public Advisory Committee. My name is Esteban Escamilla, and I'm the chairman of the committee for this year, 2024. It is a real pleasure to be with you this morning, along with my colleagues from Canada, Mexico, and the United States, as host of this session. Before we begin our event, I would like to give the floor to Amelia Monteros Gijón, member of the Traditional Ecological Knowledge Expert Group, who will honor us with a few welcoming remarks. Amelia. Good morning. Before anything else, I would like to thank this land that allows us today to be here and to be part of it. I ask permission to our ancestors, to the guardians of this site, and to acknowledge this land, to the indigenous communities, which are the guardians of the traditions of the Turtle Island, what we call today North America. We acknowledge their knowledge and their connection with the land as original guardians from way back. The Wilmington and the surrounding areas are in land that are part of traditional territories of the Macama, the Catawba, and the communities that they formed, as well as other communities that have lived in them and whose histories have been marginalized. The Commission for Environmental Cooperation commits to acknowledge and promote the respect of the rights of the indigenous communities, including the right to the self-determination in activities and decisions related to the environment in all North America. We recognize, respect, honor, and we honor the history and the resiliency of the Wilmington community in this region, where communities of many origins have fought to control historic and systematic conditions. And many in the three countries like Canada, United States and Mexico have been fighting and have this great fight so that our lands can be acknowledged. And today, we would like to thank in a symbolic manner. I have a little bit of copal, which I offer and greet the West, where we have the knowledge and we are born in our communities, our intelligence, and our being as human beings, and the awareness that we should have for our planet.
Saludo
Greetings
del norte,
to the north,
donde en este lugar
where in this site it's dark,
es un lugar para
but it is also a place to think, to turn into yourself and know what is wrong and what is right, and have that idea, and to be able to continue in this land in the red path. I greet the South, that place where sometimes we claim to be and to live forever, so that everything that has a medium time can be fruitful, can be good, and that it would allow us to balance and have a level between light and darkness. That glass medium full, and where we have the knowledge and the knowledge of our ancestors so that they can guide us and acknowledge us.
saludo al este.
I greet the East, that place where sometimes we are tired, that we don't know where to go or what to do, but that the other 3 points, we have support and we have clarity and we have to make good decisions, and we reach where we really want to reach, not for us, but because we have a responsibility of those who do not have a voice, of those who cannot speak and that have to be heard. I greet the center, and that is the heart, the love of each one of us, that internal love, that internal light that allows us to continue growing and to be able to do everything in connection with the head, the heart, in order to have better results. The belly button, the creator.
Saludo al cielo.
I greet the heavens, that heaven or
Cielo que
that sky that allows us to be here. And sometimes when it's very dark, we can't see the stars, or when we cry too much, that those tears do not allow us to see the sky. But we thank that sky that allows us to see how small we are and how infinite it is.
saludo
I greet the land, that mother which is protective and is a good giver, gives us everything. It gives us to eat, to breathe, it gives us our medications, and it gives us that knowledge. And it places it in the correct place at the correct time and when it should be. Not before, not after, but from here and from now.
de manera simbólica.
Very symbolically,
Enciendo
I
7 elementos.
I burn this to the 7 elements, to the 7 parts of each one of us, and I raise this essence to the sky so that it can be purified and comes back to each one of you in a pure way, and that it allows us to connect to the ancestors, to your roots, and that it gets and that gives good fruits as human beings, as diplomatics, as mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, friends. And I thank you for being here. I thank our ancestors from this site, and I thank all and each one of you the fact that you're here and that you have allowed us to reach these lands.
Tamatic o mitiac.
Muchas gracias, Amelia, por tu mensaje.
Thank you very much, Amelia, for your message and your very nice words, and that our with these original indigenous communities, we open this meeting. Now, I would like to. I'm pleased to give the floor to Jorge Daniel Taillant, Executive Director of the CEC, who will give a welcoming message. Daniel has a long history as an international advocate for human rights and environmental protection, working with the international bodies as an advisor to governments, leading civil society organizations and networks, and with communities to address some of the most pressing global environment challenges. He has spearheaded key global initiatives to link the defense of human rights with the defense of the environment, seeking more effective public policies, stronger legislations, and promoting accountability and respect for human rights and sustainable development by the private sector. Over the past decade, Daniel has focused particularly on addressing the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss, advocating immediate and aggressive action to eliminate the most potent climate pollutants such as methane, black carbon, hydrofluorocarbons, and the tropospheric ozone, while promoting inclusive, equitable, and resilient climate adaptation for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. Daniel, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Environmental justice is a term that was born in the mid-20th century as such. A lot of people refer to EJ, but its true meaning is sometimes lost in its widespread use. Very specific terminology and concepts define EJ, or environmental justice, and much has been written about EJ. Many of the actors with us in Wilmington here at council session have contributed to our understanding of EJ, even coining terms such as environmental racism. EJ's history is with us. It's with us today, here in this room. Because of that history, because of our leaders, we have been forging the essence of EJ. And it's important to remember this. Wilmington, in fact, is a cradle of the EJ movement. It has a long history that focuses on EJ issues, dating back to the 19th century, where civil rights leaders like Abraham Galloway, an escaped slave who traveled across North America, took up residence in Canada, in fact, fought for the rights of Black Americans. And Alexander Manly, he was the editor of a newspaper, the only Black newspaper in the Americas, called The Record. He fought for rights, he fought for human rights, and might have been really the first EJ activist, fighting for quality of life, health, and environmental standards as were understood at that time. These individuals, and many like them, many in this room today, have been fundamental parts of the EJ movement. They are environmental justice. These leaders come before us, and we must stop, and I say this especially to the young people in the room, we must stop to remember them, to understand where they came from and what they were fighting for, and thank them for their courage and what they did in their lives. But more importantly, you must build on their legacy. You are not starting alone. We are here today talking about these issues because of these leaders and what they have been able to do. Racism and discrimination comes to my mind when I think about environmental justice. But you don't have to be a scholar to define what environmental justice is. Merely saying those two words together, environment and justice, already conjures up an idea of what we're talking about. Practically anyone on the planet that maybe has never even heard of environmental justice, just by asking them what it is, they will start to think about what environmental justice really is. And actually, it's because they can understand what it's not. That's really what this discussion is about. Toxic air, extreme heat, dirty water, waste, industrial pollution, noise pollution, traffic congestion, flooding, climate impacts, and the diminishing property values that happen because of them. They are environmental justice issues. They are the injustice issues. But EJ is much more than just identifying environmental problems. We all suffer climate change, no doubt about that, every one of us, but we don't all suffer it in the same way. Not all of us lose a home due to a forest fire, to a hurricane, or to flooding, or to rising seas. And not all of us can just pick up and move to somewhere that's safer, that's cleaner, and less climate vulnerable. We all suffer poor air quality when we go through an urban environment or next to a freeway. But we don't all have to have our children walk along dirty highways to go to school every day. Not all of us have respiratory illnesses because of where we live, or because someone allowed a polluting industry to set up in our neighborhood. We all suffer extremely hot days, but we don't all suffer heat in the same way. Not all of us can afford air conditioning. Not all of us live with shady trees in our neighborhoods that the local government has decided to plant in our neighborhoods or not to plant in our neighborhoods. Environmental justice is about the equity or the inequity, both of benefiting from environmental resources, as much as it is about the equity and inequity of who suffers the impacts of environmental pollution, whether it's because of our gender, our religion, where we came from, what we look like, color of our skin. These issues are determining who suffers and who benefits from environmental resources and burdens. EJ is about fairness, It's about fairness of benefits, and it's about the unfairness of burdens. But EJ is even more than that. EJ is about the intentionality. Think about that word, the intentionality or dangerous oversights that people make consciously or sometimes unconsciously. It's about how society has made those conscious choices about who will benefit and who will suffer from environmental resources and pollution. EJ is about public policy that has intentionally decided to send pollution to certain sectors or has looked the other way when making those decisions. It's also about those unconscious choices, however unintentional, to send harm in inequitable directions. EJ is about the 4 Ps, as I call them sometimes: pollution, people, place, and policy, and how those interrelate. When you're looking for a place to start a home or enjoy the weekend or take a vacation, you don't look for a place with bad air. You don't look for a place that has total extreme heat or is next to some noisy freeway or some polluting industry. That's not where you go to have a nice, safe, quiet time. You look for something green and clean and inviting, a place that's quiet, that's tranquil and inspiring. You look for a place that will help you thrive, where you will enjoy your environment and enjoy life, where you can live in good health, and where you will be happy with your family on whatever it is that you're doing. You look for a place after a long day's work where you actually like to go home and enjoy being there. You look for a place where you will feel safe. But the reality is that not everyone has such a place in their lives. That is what EJ is about. It's about ensuring that we're all able to exercise the right to a healthy environment for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, and for generations to come. And even more so, that no one intentionally or unintentionally, no matter our race, our gender, our age, our sexual orientation, or our disability, or our migratory status, or any other defining characteristic about us, it's about making sure that no one has the right to hold those rights away from us and not allow us to live in a healthy place. Environmental justice has become the goal of many advocates for sustainability, of many communities seeking to improve their lives, to rid themselves of pollution, and to prosper in a healthy environment. But not all communities can do that. And EJ has also become the goal of a lot of public policy. But efforts to promote environmental justice don't always carry the EJ label. It's not always called environmental justice. And this is something that we're learning about at the CC as we dive deeper into EJ. Sometimes EJ comes disguised as the need for more information about those decisions that affect our lives, or that we have access to pollution data and know where that contamination is, or that we're able to participate in processes and in decision-making that will determine the industries that go in our neighborhood or where those freeways go through our cities. Sometimes it comes as maps that show us where the pollution is and where people live. And when you start looking at those maps, putting together that pollution and where those trees are and where people are living and where people are not living, EJ starts to become very clear. It may show up in policy or in projects as urban forests and gardens. It may show up as cooling stations for hot days. It may show up as just better or cheaper or more thermal building materials to keep us warm in winter and cool in summer, or projects to capture water. Or maybe it's a project about resurfacing a stream that was covered by cement, a stream that used to be the life for ecosystems in our neighborhoods and is no longer there. And so whether EJ appears as an attempt to tackle historical or persistent and systemic problems about people, place, and pollution, or whether EJ is about nature and solutions to improving environmental quality, EJ is about creating a better environment for those that need it most, for those that have done least to cause environmental problems, and for those who have the least resources necessary to live better and healthier lives. I don't need to tell this crowd that we have a climate emergency. You all know that. we all feel that this climate really is escalating quickly and unfolding all around us. The latest news is not very good. You know that 2023, just like 2022, becomes our hottest year ever. And the temperatures are still rising. We all talk about Paris and 1.5. Well, we're breaching 1.5, but we're already there. And so we're not meeting the mark. And this is triggering irreversible tipping points. And we're not slowing the trend, unfortunately. We're headed to 2.8 by the end of the century or even higher. And really, at this point, there is no time to waste. We have to choose very quickly and very wisely what to do about this emergency. And bad choices should not be on the table. We don't have the benefit of taking bad choices and then correcting our path. We need to understand this. Each 1/10 of a degree matters because it means a 1/10 of a degree more suffering and pain and irreversible ecological collapse. And here's something I was chatting about with our youth in the room this morning. Decarbonization, not enough. It doesn't fix the problem quick enough. We need other solutions. We need to not only decarbonize, we also need to remove other really powerful pollutants like methane, 86 times worse than CO2, and black carbon, which is melting our glaciers, but that is also terrible for human health. We need avoided warming strategies. We need to cool without having to cool. So if you're spending all your energy on cooling your environments, this is not the way to go. We need to bring in nature to help us cool the environment, whether that's through reflective roofs or gardens on rooftops or other shading or more thermal materials. This is what we need to be thinking about, and we need to be thinking about it very quickly. EJ is about a balanced approach to mitigation and adaptation. We need an environmental justice approach to the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. I want to shift quickly to the CEC, to the JPAC, which is this forum, and to this council session, and talk about why we're here today and what we hope to achieve. The CEC was created 30 years ago. It was integral to the NAFTA agreement, now called the USMCA CUSMA, or TEMEC in Spanish. And the three countries got together to work on environment and to forge a North American identity. NAFTA was, by the way, the first trade agreement to incorporate an environmental chapter to it. And there are three main bodies: the Council, which is the governing board that's made up of the heads of each country's environmental agencies. It's the EPA, it's the Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the Semarnat in Mexico. The Secretariat, which has helped organize this event, it's our team that sits in Montreal. And the JPAC. And JPAC is the public forum. It's a space, it's the body that advises the council. And that's you. So you're an integral part of the CEC, and it's important to remember that. And I also want to recognize the TKG, the Traditional Ecological Knowledge Experts Group, because that is a growing body within the CEC. It's an advisory group that we love to work with, and it really is helping us. And they're here today. You've met a few of the members already. This council session is the moment that we come together each year. It's the one moment we all come together to talk shop, to talk about where we've been, where we're at, and where we want to go. And this forum, especially for JPAC, and this meeting today, right before the beginnings of the governing council meetings, is where you prepare your advice to council. It's where you talk about what should be the priority. And like in any democracy, it's the people who tell the government what needs to be done. The exchanges that take place here today are being recorded, they're being gathered, and we're talking about different issues even in the hallways, even before this meeting, at lunchtime. We are setting the agenda in our discussion. And this is the moment where you come together as one of our constituent bodies and get to speak to the council to tell them where they should be thinking about heading. On Wednesday, there will be an in-camera session, it's a private session, with the council, and the JPAC chair will tell the council what we've talked about today and what we've been talking about in the work that you've been doing at the CEC and with the CEC and the work that you've been doing in your own organizations. And this is why everything that leads up to this moment And the discussions that happen in this room today and leading up to it really matter. And that's one message I try to send home to the JPAC each time I meet with the JPAC. Your opinion really does matter. And after council sessions, you will see that the CC will develop projects. It gets its orientation and its direction from your input. So while you're here today, I invite you to think about that. You're not just at some random meeting, just another one of those meetings on climate or on environment. I challenge you to think about your work and how it contributes to environmental justice, which is the reigning theme of this meeting. Try to think about equity. Try to think about how to reverse those patterns of discrimination. And then think hard about what you want to say to the council, because it is important. How we say things and what we say does matter. Now, not all environmental work is about addressing inequity. And I want to stress that, because sometimes we tend to think that everything is EJ, and it's not. EJ does have some very specific pillars and elements to it. It really is about equity. It's about fairness. It's about discrimination. So as you think about that message, think about how we need to move forward on environmental justice. Our three countries have committed significant resources to this EJ pathway. This US administration has done probably more than any other, maybe even combined, to put resources into EJ. So thank you to the United States. Mexico has firmly embraced pillars of environmental justice, procedural pillars, and through agreements like the Escazú agreement is contributing substantively to discussions regionally and even globally to environmental justice. And Canada has just adopted its first EJ law, fantastic. And that's going to lead to much discussion, to engagement, to strategies and policies and programs about environmental justice. So our three countries are together on an issue at this moment, very, very aligned on policy. And it would be great that we take this opportunity to steer our trilateral platform in a constructive direction. A few of the things that we've been doing at the CC in the course of the last year or two, or last few years, we're in our next cycle of our EJ for Climate grants, a very important part of our work to work with communities and to support communities working on environmental justice. We've just launched a Communities for Environmental Justice network, and some of you are a part of that network, and we hope to see more engage. We've also launched a new project on air quality improvement for environmental justice, and we're making EJ a cross-cutting element in all of our work. But we can do a lot more, and we will. And we understand that EJ means very different things to different communities and to each of our countries. So we've launched a deep dive looking into EJ, trying to understand EJ better. We're learning, we're asking questions, and trying to break the status quo and thinking of what EJ really means in each of our countries. I draw your attention to a few resources that are already available. We have, I think I brought it up here with me, discussion paper. It's a product of over a year of research by interns, by our new EJ fellows that are here with us at this conference, and I hope that you will meet them. That's Yvette and Danny. I think Danny's stuck somewhere, hasn't gotten here yet, but Yvette is here. She can raise her hand. She's right over here. This discussion paper is a deep dive into the history of EJ. I invite you to take a look at it. If you find me, there's a little QR code that you can scan and download it right on your phone. We also just published a discussion paper on EJ and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+ issues. Fantastic discussions we had last year at a roundtable we held, and doing a deeper dive on the intersectionality of EJ. We've just launched a new EJ website, which I invite you to visit on our main page. And we also have an EJ email, which is ej@cc.org for the moment. I get a copy of those emails, so I'm going to see all that traffic. I invite you to contact us. Do put EJ and CC into your Google alerts. I guarantee you, you will be hearing a lot more about our work on EJ in the coming months and years. We're very interested in what is emerging on this issue, on the intersectionality and multidisciplinary dimensions of EJ, indigenous questions around EJ that are somewhat different than the more traditional discussions around EJ. This council session is all about EJ, so do engage with all of the events, and most importantly, meet people on the side, find out who's here, talk to the people that are here with us, to those that have been here for a while and that have really been part of this movement. There are some stellar individuals that are going to be with us or that are already here, and as well with the young people who are taking this issue forward. Institutions, government agencies, the CC, NGOs, academic institutions are all important to this fight. But more important than the institutions are the collective people who lead them, the leaders, the people who make up the institution, the staff, the program people. Those are the people that are actually working on these issues, and the individuals matter more than the institutions. And we have a choice. We can be complacent about how things are always done. So when you think about those historical and systemic problems of discriminations, that is the history. That is how things have been done. Or we can choose to change, which is really our opportunity, and change to make things better, to correct the systems and to correct those historic wrongs that have taken place on the few and disadvantaged. I invite all of us to choose that change. And I invite you all to help lead the way. The time is now. We're out of time. So please take action, move forward, do your thing. And thank you very much for coming to our council session. And I invite our JPAC chair to come back to the podium.
Muchas gracias, Jorge Daniel, por tu intervención.
Thank you very much, Jorge Daniel, for your intervention. You gave us some historic background in terms of environmental justice and challenges, significant challenges, and the opportunities that we can address in these events. Before we continue, I would like to ask you to answer the question that appears on the screen. Please display it on the screen, which will allow us to identify which country you are joining us from. The results of the survey will be given to you at the end of my speech. Our forum today will have three main components, beginning with a keynote address by Diandra Marizet Esparza, Executive Director of Intersectional Environmentalist, and then this will be followed by two panels. The first on legal and policy instruments for accessing and enforcing environmental justice in North America, and the second on community mobilization and environmental justice challenges. We will also hear a report from representatives of the U.S. national and governmental advisory committees and have an open dialogue on opportunities for trilateral environmental cooperation, where we will answer the following question. Can we think about environmental justice from a North American regional perspective? I am also pleased to mention that our event is being webcast live simultaneously in Spanish, English, and French. As some of you may know, our committee has made extensive use of electronic tools and social networks to ensure that citizens of all three countries, regardless of their location or language, have access to timely information on environmental issues in North America. For those of you who are not familiar with the Joint Public Advisory Committee, JPAC, for its acronym in English, please allow me to provide a brief introduction. As Daniel mentioned, the Joint Public Advisory Committee is one of the three constituent bodies of the Commission, composed of 9 citizens volunteers, 3 from each country, appointed by the respective governments of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Our mandate as was also mentioned by Daniel, is to advise the council made up of the environment ministers of the 3 North American countries on any matter within the scope of the agreement of environmental cooperation, and to perform any other role that the council may entrust to us. Our committee protects the ecosystems and promotes the economic development in a sustainable manner to ensure and guarantee citizen engagement and transparency of the Commission activities. The members of the committee have the commitment of preserving the North American environment and achieving a sustainable society. The committee works based on a consensus and acknowledges its work as a microcosm of citizens that contribute with cultural diverse perspectives. Our committee, together with the Council, develops an annual plan of activities each year. This year, our work will focus on continuing to strengthen collaboration with the other bodies that make up the CEC, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, as well as with the group of traditional ecological knowledge experts who are also with us today. In addition, we will make efforts focused on promoting dialogue and knowledge exchange on issues such as trade and environment, the climate crisis, and water, among others, always incorporating as cross-cutting themes traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous perspectives, and the integration of gender, equity, diversity, and inclusion perspectives. We normally meet with citizens twice a year, rotating among the 3 countries. One of these meetings is always held to coincide with the regular session of the Council, as it is the case with today's meeting. We're also in charge of conducting public consultations of the CEC on project proposals and initiatives, strategic plans, among others. The chairman of JPAC also participates in the meetings of the alternate representatives, and the full committee meets with the council once a year during a in-session in a closed session, which will be held this Wednesday. Now I'm going to ask my colleagues from the JPAC to briefly introduce themselves. We're going to start with Cecia. Please introduce yourself.
Por ahí un micrófono, por favor.
Good morning. My name is Cecia Ikud. I represent the peninsula of Yucatan. I am research from the Autonomous University in Yucatan, and I'm very happy to be here. And we work with the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, and we work on how to collect fresh water in indigenous youth in our community. I'm currently working on pollinators with children in my community and rescuing native bees, and also overseeing the projects that affect our territory, specifically the intensive agriculture that we have in Campeche from the Mennonites. It is a farming practice that has devastated millions of hectares of the jungle and rainforest, and also the cenotes in Yucatan. So I am very honored to be part of the council, and also the guardian of enforcement of international laws for the environment and our territory. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cecia. from Mexico.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Octaviana Trujillo. I'm Professor Emerita of Applied Indigenous Studies at Northern Arizona University. I'm a former chairwoman of the Pasquayaqui Tribe of Arizona, former EPA chair for the Governmental Advisory Committee. Currently, I'm on the board for the Alianza Indígena Sin Fronteras, and also a member of the advisory board member for America's Research Network. Very happy to see everyone. I look forward to meeting and chatting with you during our breaks, and welcome.
Thank you, Octaviana. Felicia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Felicia Marcus, a member of the JPAC from the United States. I'm a visiting fellow at Stanford University's Water in the West program and have a long career in the nonprofit sector in the U.S. and in government at the U.S. EPA, the State Water Board of California during the Brown administration, and the Public Works Department in the city of Los Angeles after having been a public interest lawyer. It's been an honor to serve on the JPAC, and I look forward to this meeting, particularly with its focus on environmental justice, and look forward to getting to know everyone and coming up with our recommendations for the ministers from this meeting.
Thank you, Bob.
My name is Bob Varney. I'm a member of the JPAC from the U.S. I previously also served on the Governmental Advisory Committee advising the head of the EPA on the CEC and its activities. So I have a long history with the organization and have seen lots of good things happen over the years. It's been quite impressive to have this kind of collaboration, working together, recognizing that we all share the environment. Our three countries from North America need to be working together if we're to achieve our goals, and there's much to be gained by this collaboration that we're seeing here today and throughout the years. I'm president of an environmental science consulting firm, so I'm in the private sector, have been for the past 15 years. Prior to that, I was the regional administrator for EPA New England, the 6 New England states. And prior to that, I was a state environmental commissioner where I served in the cabinet of 3 governors from both political parties. I also have a background in urban and regional planning, which together with my environmental work has spurred a strong interest in environmental justice, having developed an environmental justice policy at the state back in 1995, helping to pull together the first ever meeting of environmental justice advocates with state environmental commissioners in the U.S. to develop more collaboration, and mandating environmental justice training for all of my EPA employees in the New England region, while undertaking a number of collaborative efforts with environmental justice organizations. So it's really been terrific to see the good work of the CEC in this area. There's a lot to be learned and many challenges, and we need all of you to be working with us moving forward to achieve the goals that we all share. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Now we have the presentation of the members who are in this room, but we have Luis Alfonso from Mexico, who is in Zoom. Luis Alfonso, go ahead.
Sí, con mucho gusto. Luis Alfonso Argüelles Suárez, ingeniero forestal egresado de la Universidad de Wilmington. He dedicado mi vida básicamente.
I have dedicated my life. I'm sorry, he has very bad sound.
Soy el representante.
I am the representative in Mexico.
Trabajo ahora
I have a lot of work right now. I'm very busy with the restorations of forestry landscapes in the tropical Mexican tropic.
esto, justo lo que hoy se discute, los temas sociales ambientales. Estoy encantado.
I am very happy to be with JPAC, working with Esteban,
Y tener todo nuestro respaldo como líder de nuestro equipo.
and thank you for being the leader of our team. Greetings to all. Unfortunately, the colleagues from Canada for different issues couldn't be present. Now, I would like to inform you, for those of you who are in this room, that you can send us your questions using the QR code that is on the screen, that are in your table. And for those of you who are in line, you can use the questions in Zoom. And if you don't want to use the microphones that are available or the QR code, you can write your questions, or you can write your questions and Mariana can pick up your questions so that Mariana can pick up your questions. Now, I am pleased to present a video entitled The Voices of Our Collaborators, which showcases the spirit of collaboration across North America, highlighting diverse voices and messages about the important work a CEC does to foster collaboration focused on ecosystem conservation and community resiliency of communities. Go ahead, please, with the video.
We all benefit from collaboration. Without collaboration, we're left to our own devices.
North America, 3 countries, 1 environment. A dynamic region recognized for its diversity and vibrant communities. From its bustling cities to its tight-knit rural towns, our region shines through the resilience of its people. Among its breathtaking landscapes, each community in Canada, Mexico, and the United States contributes in its own unique way to the conservation of the region's diverse ecosystems, fostering a spirit of collaboration that transcends borders.
In Canada, we're so privileged to have such beautiful environments and natural ecosystems, and we need to continue to protect that to have a healthy future for everyone.
México tiene una biodiversidad increíble. Aún tenemos mucha biodiversidad que cuidar y proteger.
The United States is blessed to encompass such a wide diversity of landscapes and water.
But in the middle of this impressive biodiversity, our communities and ecosystems face multiple threats from climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss.
Es el momento de hacer algo al respecto.
Yet in the face of these challenges, there is hope. Individuals, communities, organizations, and governments at every level are working alongside the Commission for Environmental Cooperation to address the region's environmental, social, and economic issues. One of the keys to its many successes, collaboration.
We couldn't have done it alone. It says something about we got to work together. Like if we're going to have this world that we live in, we can't do it by ourselves. Trying to do it by yourself, you'll be out there in the ocean by yourself. You'll be alone.
The CEC has brought 3 countries together to work for a very important vision.
Même s'ils sont à des milliers de kilomètres de nous, au final, on a les mêmes objectifs et les mêmes aspirations.
It was wonderful when the CEC was formed to bring the states and provinces and federal agencies together with scientists.
Collaboration can take many forms, and through outreach and engagement, we aim to continue expanding our network of collaborators. Our joint efforts have not only improved our work, but have also built relationships of trust, respect, and mutual support, laying the foundation for continued development, learning, and the creation of a strong North American network.
compromiso ambiental.
We are working with one heart, one mind together.
Actuar en colaboración podemos avanzar más rápido.
Listening.
Los esfuerzos aislados no causan un buen impacto.
Felicidad, equilibrio,
inclusión.
Friendship.
The strength of collaboration knows no boundaries. When we all come together in pursuit of a common goal, the benefits for people and the environment are endless.
People, everyone, there's so much we can learn from having different perspectives.
Todos nos beneficiamos de una muy buena colaboración, incluyendo el medio ambiente, siempre y cuando haya una bonita sinergia.
Todos y todas, en todos los niveles, desde las comunidades hasta los sectores institucionales y gubernamentales.
Over the years, the CEC has worked with diverse collaborators, and we want to celebrate and recognize the impact we've achieved together.
Presenting at council sessions provided our entire team a ton of confidence.
El Grant de Napica ha sido muy importante para el desarrollo de nuestro trabajo. Nos ha permitido también trabajar de la mano de las comunidades.
The fact that they are being funded for their resilient recovery effort has really just allowed them to achieve really great success.
To all our collaborators, we are proud of our shared journey and look forward to continuing on this path together. North America, Turtle Island is our home. Let us rise to the challenge and be its guardians for many generations to come.
This is our home, north to south. We can live together. We can make it right together.
Let them know that we're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for humanity, protecting this place.
Don't give up. We can do this together. Don't have to do it alone. Stay up and stay standing.
Unissez-vous pour créer un impact et un meilleur avenir pour notre société. Parce qu'ensemble, on peut aller beaucoup plus loin.
I would just say keep fighting, and there is a space for everybody to be a part of that.
Thank you very much for the video. Before we continue, we are going to see the results of the survey in order to look at the origins of the people who are participating. The participations are very balanced from the three countries. Now, I am happy to introduce Diandra Marizet Esparza. Diandra is a strategist. She's a writer, poet, and co-founder of the Intersectional Environmentalist, where she performs as executive director. Diandra is looking for environmentalists in all the world to acknowledge the culture as our relationship with the land. In this sense, and as part of her work, she has different stories for future generations. Diandra contributes to the publication of the Intersectional Environmentalist and how to protect people and the planet. Our book that has the approval in this academia. Diandra, it's an honor to have Diandra with us.
How are we doing, everybody? We have coffee. By a quick show of hands, how many of us here are representing Mexico? Canada? The US? Okay. All right, so equitable split. Again, my name is Diandra Marizet Esparza. I'm an environmental justice communicator. I'm a cultural storyteller. I'm a dogger. I am a Thea, and I'm a friend. And I'm here this morning to help kick off your time at this important conference with a vision of hope, yet urgent transformation for the future that I've already seen by building my organization, Intersectional Environmentalist. It's a little bit of a mouthful, IE for short. But IE is a climate justice collective that educates millions of people monthly on the various ways that diverse people are experiencing and fighting the climate crisis, all with the hopes of providing tools that empower people to practice radically imagining a more equitable future for people and for this planet, not ours. We largely educate people on intersectional environmentalism. Who here before today has heard the term intersectional environmentalism? Okay, a few people. For those of you who haven't heard the term just yet, intersectional environmentalism, coined by the founder of my organization, is an inclusive version of environmentalism that advocates for both the protection of people and the planet. It's a lens that identifies the ways in which justice is happening to marginalized communities and the earth are interconnected. And it brings those injustices done to the most vulnerable communities and the earth to the forefront of our conversations, and it doesn't minimize or silence social inequality. And as we gain deeper understandings of what environmental injustice looks like and all the ways we can apply an intersectional lens to identify those most vulnerable, we also need tools to imagine the justice part. What does a just future look like? And who gets to participate in imagining what it looks like? We need to radically improve our ability to imagine a future where we thrive with enough clarity and detail that it can be translated into policy, wealth redistribution, emergency response, and climate resilience. How many of you are familiar, or maybe touch on within your work, the mental health crisis that's associated with climate change? A few people are talking about this in their work. In a global survey done by Bath University measuring the depth of anxiety many young people are feeling about climate change today, 56% said that they think humanity is doomed. Thanks to how long mainstream environmental movements have ignored solutions being brought forth by those most heavily impacted, I've learned most environmentalists can imagine the end of humanity with more detail and clarity than they can imagine a future beyond the most exploitative, unsustainable, and life-threatening industries we have foolishly built economic reliance on. Now take a moment to ask yourself, if someone came up and asked you about environmental injustice, what that looks like, how many of you feel pretty confident you could describe what that looks like, what that is? Okay, not too many people in the room. Now, how many of you that just raised your hands with equal detail and vigor could describe what a just future looks like? So we've been thinking about it. That's good. So what's missing? My team has completed research and consulting projects for some of our country's largest academic institutions, Fortune 500 companies, and we've led community engagement initiatives for the White House, and I repeatedly found the same thing. The solutions to the climate crisis already exist, and they exist at local organized levels. We just have to be humble enough as people sitting in rooms like this to admit that our current systems don't work, and instead we have to support and protect theirs. We can shape a future beyond corporate exploitation and environmental injustice. We can heal our planet, but we must bring diverse voices and community-led solutions to the table. We must provide them with resources and aid, and most importantly, we must prevent corporations from engaging in predatory behaviors that prevent them from building solutions that they're already ready to build. So here's why. Of all the organizational mission statements I've supported, I can loosely summarize all of them loosely into one statement. Climate change has unfolded rapidly before us because our elders have had their relationship to land disrupted or destroyed to support corporate interests. The EPA's role is to protect public health and the environment, but the scope and power of the EPA doesn't include enough clarity around protecting people's relationship and connection to land from corporate interests. We need new guidelines that consider the cultural, spiritual, and historical significance of land to communities who have been stewarding them for generations. Indigenous and diverse cultural relationships to land have been developed over thousands of years. And these are relationships that once wove sustainability into the fabric of society, and we're losing that. Indigenous communities, for example, currently protect 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, despite making up less than 5% of the global population. Meanwhile, Indigenous communities report being deprioritized in data collection, often as a result of how small their population size is. Maybe we should ask ourselves, why is their population size so small? We need intersectional approaches to research and data collection that tell us not only if restoration and conservation projects are working, but if we're successfully providing the tools to help people reignite their traditional ecological practices or establish new practices that are culturally relevant to their communities, because we need less solutions that look like academic papers, and we need more solutions that look and feel like home. Because policy cannot produce sustainable, thriving futures. Only communities with connection to land can do that. But policy can protect our ability to reclaim that relationship from predatory behaviors of corporations, and we are prepared to do so in economically viable ways. We've done a lot of aftercare and not nearly enough preventative care, not nearly enough resilience building. In order to stop making the same mistakes, we have to center the tough stories of stolen land, immigration, displacement, genocide, and disaster. Because only those stories can unlock the imagining of systems that support new stories of community resilience, resistance, restoration, and joy. Tools, frameworks, and approaches that are imagined and born from this very difficult duality have all the answers that you and I can engage now. But to convince others to do so, we have to be willing to see just how uniquely people experience environmental issues, so that we learn there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. People with intersecting identities uniquely experience climate change and environmental exploitation, and much of our understanding of this in the US was born at the intersection of race and income level. Just 5 years ago, it was hard to talk to people about the intersections of environmentalism and social justice. I wasn't getting invited to too many dinner parties those days. But Warren County, North Carolina, just 3 hours from here, is often described as the birthplace of the environmental justice movement back in 1982, when the state of North Carolina made the decision to dump 40,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil in the backyards of poor Black farming communities. Local community members, notably led by unpaid Black women, organized neighbors to peacefully protest, chant, risk arrest, and physically lay their bodies in the way of dump trucks that were coming to pour toxins in their neighborhoods. This community was ignored, often being told that they had no proof or evidence of racial discrimination. And the dumping did occur despite federal regulations like the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of 1976, which should have safeguarded this community against hazardous waste that could cause harm to human health and the environment. These regulations failed to address consistent complaints from people calling attention to their close proximity to these hazardous waste sites, causing health concerns that their communities were ill-equipped to address. So in 1987, the United Church of Christ self-published a report called Toxic Waste and Race. How many of you have heard of this report? This report concluded and made irrefutable that race was the #1 indicator of proximity to toxic waste sites in the US. this is still true today. And I'm certain applies similarly in Mexico and in Canada as well. Reports like this have led to deeper learnings, like Black and Latina communities experiencing approximately 56 and 63% more air pollution than they cause, while white Americans experience 17% less air pollution than they cause. This report was such a significant milestone that not only sparked movements around environmental racism, but also opened up other conversations about additional identities that face disproportionate environmental burdens that were later emboldened by the coining of terms like intersectionality by Kimberly Crenshaw. For example, due to discrimination that queer, trans, and two-spirit communities encounter in healthcare spaces, their ability to receive adequate treatment for pollution-related and other health issues related to environmental concerns can not only be psychologically risky as a result of that discrimination, but it can also be physically dangerous as well. A Washington Post analysis of FBI data recently found that school hate crimes targeting LGBTQ+ people have sharply risen in recent years, climbing fastest in states that have passed laws restricting LGBTQ+ students' rights and education. The EPA must step in because the protection of human health is at risk. And right now, there are many states, my home state of Texas included, with political leaders seeking to benefit from dehumanization that will get them elected. Similarly, disabled communities with respiratory and cardiovascular issues may become more vulnerable to things like air pollution. And they may live in higher risk areas due to higher low income rates and therefore poor access to healthcare systems. So now imagine you are a queer, disabled person of color whose family hasn't financially recovered from slavery and segregation in America. Job discrimination is challenging to navigate in your anti-LGBT+ state. Therefore, healthcare options that you need are out of your financial reach. And the only food you can access in your lower income area was grown near a toxic waste site that's been there for decades. So now your health concerns are worsening. This is a reality for so many, and clearly shows us that queer rights is an environmental justice issue, disability rights is an environmental justice issue, food access is an environmental justice issue, and we experience these issues at varying degrees of advantage and disadvantage based on social and systemic conditions that we've all connected to our identities. Thankfully, pick it up a little bit, grassroots organizations and efforts all around the country and the world are already building solutions that take their community's unique needs into account. But we have to ensure that they have the resources to research their solutions, train and educate their communities in culturally relevant ways, and provide unique services that keep their communities healthy, safe, and engaged. In the past 60 years, America has seen massive transfers of wealth from the middle class to the wealthiest families, which is only exacerbating wealth inequality and therefore people's capacity to respond to and equip themselves to the climate crisis. And it creates room for industries to only continue prioritizing profit over human life and environmental conservation, because what economic power do people have to defend themselves? The same disparities are occurring in the nonprofit space. A 2023 study conducted by the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Sustainability Initiative at the Yale School of Environment sheds light on the realities of environmental grant making today, analyzing that nearly $5 billion in grants awarded by 220 foundations across 35 states found that despite growing awareness of the disparities in grant making, several of the largest mainstream environmental organizations continue to receive more funding than all environmental justice organizations combined. A 2020 report by the Building Equity and Alignment Initiative found that only about 1% of environmental grant making from 12 of the largest environmental funders went to environmental justice groups, and even less so to those led by women of color. I would know. And research by the Solutions Project found that half of the philanthropic funding on climate issues goes to 20 national organizations, 90% of which are led by white people, 80% of which are men. These are organizations maintaining robust, established donor networks and dedicated grant writing teams that smaller organizations don't have. And the grant writing space is confusing, it's difficult, it's outdated, and it's isolating. I can attest because I run one of the largest environmental justice education platforms in this country. My organization has also been recognized globally for its impact in the education space when it comes to environmental justice. And I don't know how to access the funding you're providing. Funneling funding through white-led organizations also is not a good idea. There are Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led organizations like mine, like the Solutions Project, and many more, who can do this work instead, because we know our communities best. Data shows that we are successfully funding those least vulnerable, and that has to change. Looking at critical issues that are so deeply connected, like environmental racism, rising health crises, joblessness, poverty, homelessness, we need to adopt language that eliminates loopholes for exploitative corporations and polluting industries like fossil fuels, agriculture, fashion, transportation, and construction. We must disincentivize them from targeting, perpetuating, and creating more vulnerable communities for short-term economic gain that has never been successful in creating a trickle-down effect that stabilizes our economies. That has never worked. And in the face of such wild inequity, the penalties are not high enough. The loopholes are too big for big, wealthy corporations who just build legal and penalty fees into their ROIs. I say wealthy corporations specifically because I do believe that smaller businesses should not bear a disproportionate brunt of environmental progress, because this leads to fewer community-owned shops and services, and our neighborhoods are losing their souls. For example, in my hometown back in Texas, my family has access to just about every fast food chain you can imagine, and the only coffee shop around is Prado, and is all. There's little to no access to local restaurants and community shops, which is a very scary dystopian feeling every time I go home to see my nephews. A place to live that looks a lot more like a corporate experiment than a community-led neighborhood is not part of the future I'm radically imagining. We need to protect small community businesses while holding large corporations who cause harm to begin with accountable. Sticking with my home state for just a moment, sorry, Texas. In 2023, Texas produced more oil than every country in the world besides Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. Texas's fossil fuel activity is expected to make cancer diagnoses hit record highs in 2024. However, Texas is also the #1 state in producing renewable energy, and organizations that I work with, like Poder, are helping local representatives show people how Texas has the means to drive a clean and just transition now. And in the meantime, can connect our electrical grids so that all Americans have access to reliable energy sources. But we do need a transition that is just. The same organization is also fighting Tesla in Austin, Texas, for displacing Indigenous and Latina communities from their historic neighborhoods. Tesla is disrupting relationships to land and destabilizing communities in a state that believes in over-policing instead of repairing, which leads me to our prison systems that legally force incarcerated people to work for little to no pay, which estimates show that anywhere from 2 to 14 billion in wages are stolen by corporations annually. This exploitation is an environmental justice issue. Prisons are often near toxic facilities. They fail to protect inmates from climate disasters. And overfunding of police and underfunding of restorative justice programming for communities is economically destabilizing and stealing. It is stealing from families of color and leading to less capacity for them to thrive. Organizations like Dream Defenders are addressing these issues by creating community-based programs that reduce violence, improve mental health, and divert people from the criminal legal system, all while promoting equitable access to clean, safe, and healthy environments. Underpaid and unpaid labor is an environmental justice issue that also connects to how immigration is an environmental justice issue. Scientific American, any Scientific American readers? Every Sunday? No? Okay. Scientific American recently reported that informal economy workers in the US, usually Mexican migrants, not only drive our agricultural workforces under grueling conditions like our record high temperatures that are currently killing people all over the country, but they're also hired by big disaster recovery firms in the US, only to face exploitation and risk injury or death. By making migrants more easily exploitable, we feed the flames of capitalism and those who thrive off the unpaid labor of others and disincentivize investment in resilient solutions that protect communities from disaster to begin with. There are local organizations all over the country that focus specifically on policy, public health, and empowerment for immigrants in America. These organizations recognize that the true threats to our economic viability look nothing like migrant workers, and a lot more like corporate CEOs who refuse to take action towards equitable futures. Climate migration globally is also rising as we continue to allow people's relationship to land to be disrupted or destroyed. I was recently in Puerto Rico, where I heard from organizers who are campaigning with the slogan, "No more people without homes and no more homes without people." Developers are flocking to Puerto Rico, but something's off. Developers are getting away with coming in and building luxury buildings on the beach for largely white wealthy tourists, while community restoration plans that have proven to be more resilient to storms remain without investment. The funding being funneled into recovering coastal areas isn't reaching those most impacted. It isn't protecting people's relationship to land. Which brings me to the climate migrant story, one that is connected to our global human rights failures. Currently, millions of people in our countries are watching millions of people being displaced, starved, bombed, and then erased from history in Palestine, Sudan, Congo, and more. These deeply interconnected issues always come back to relationships to land that are going unprotected. Indigenous Palestinians, for example, who are currently being forcibly displaced from their homelands, as they have been for over 70 years now, are being replaced by non-native trees that harm the environment and new Israeli neighborhoods that hide evidence of Palestinian existence. In fact, freshly bombed Palestinian land is already being put on the market for Israelis to purchase right now, as you and I sit here. We're still recovering from the horrific sights coming out of Gaza and the West Bank. U.S. involvement in protecting and aiding Israel is deeply intertwined with corporate greed and economic interests that have made the U.S. a key player in aiding genocide. And the environmental agencies representing all our countries must denounce genocide as an environmental justice issue. Land is being poisoned so that it's no longer livable, and safe routes are being bombed so movement feels impossible. This is an environmental justice disaster that needs urgent accountability and action. As a young nonprofit leader, I've carried the joy of my work impacting millions of people while also carrying the heavy weight of stories I struggle to imagine life beyond because of how unimaginable they are to begin with. But our ancestors and our elders have overcome the unimaginable. And this has taught me that joy is not a gift. It is a discipline, a practice of showing up and imagining creative new ways to protect people and this planet with the skills and the resources that we have, because that's all we've ever done. So I'm asking you today to meet the unimaginable with a radical imagination. We have so much opportunity, and it starts with ensuring that people can reclaim environmentally connected cultures and relationships to land. Our processes must include community-based participatory research so that our critical voices, stories, and knowledge from those most vulnerable can help shape more protective policies. We need more collaborative governance that includes land-back initiatives and sovereignty for Indigenous communities that can recognize ecologies we share as a result of man-made borders. We must support grassroots organizers in accessing funding more easily to invest in their community efforts and public programs and education campaigns. We need more cultural organizers facilitating programs designed to engage their own communities instead of bringing people who aren't from our neighborhoods, tasking us with the burden of educating them for years before they can really make meaningful change in our lives. We need to enforce stronger corporate accountability. We need systems that acknowledge the economic contributions of informal economy workers. We need to demand urgent phasing out of fossil fuels and a just transition. We need to protect Indigenous rights, and we must recognize genocide as the human rights issue that it is. Your task now, this week, as you navigate connecting with one another and as you continue listening to all the panels and discussions, is to recognize intersectional environmentalism everywhere you go, to see the interconnected nature of all these issues across our countries, to focus on removing barriers that prevent communities from accessing resources they need and building stronger systems of accountability for corporations who have caused the climate crisis and made the CEC so imperative to begin with. And it starts with a willingness to radically imagine the future where we get to thrive on this planet, not on Mars. Thank you.
Le agradecemos a Diandra su.
We would like to thank Diandra for her excellent conference. This is an ethical perspective and socio-environmental.
Desafortunadamente.
Unfortunately, time is always upon us. And if you have any questions, please go to Diandra and ask her personally a few questions. I think that this is a topic, like I mentioned, very important. Before going into a break, I would like to ask you to go and answer the questions on the screen. And when you come back, we will give you the answers. We will take a 5-minute break in order not to, we have 2 more panels. Thank you very much.
Was delayed in travel, but will be joining us remotely, Paolo. And our other 3 presenters are here in person, fortunately. All made it, despite some of the difficulties with travel and storm activity that affected travel. The presentation focuses on environmental burdens resulting from the use and misuse of land and its resources that have distributed unequally with the poor, marginalized, and minority communities bearing much of the load. Environmental law and policy need to prevent this from occurring by addressing the gap with clear legislative requirements, accountability mechanisms, and public policies. We will hear from 3 countries, panelists from 3 countries who will discuss legal and policy mechanisms and instruments that are used to implement environmental justice. And I think it's important to note that there are significant differences among the 3 countries, as well as with our indigenous communities, in how they define environmental justice, how they relate to the work that they're doing. The different approaches vary considerably given the differences in legal and policy guidance and mechanisms. And so it should be quite interesting. And we hope that you'll ask plenty of questions because I think generally speaking, many don't recognize these differences and don't understand that there are challenges in countries where they may not have the same guidance, may not have the same legal authorities, and so it presents unique challenges that need to be recognized. And I think it's great that the CEC will be working on this moving forward in terms of bringing all three countries and our indigenous communities together to try to find best practices, find ways to collaborate, find lessons learned from each other, and unique approaches that could be applied to their situations. With that, I do want to also mention that there was a poll taken. Did we put the poll results up? Samantha, do you know if the poll from the last session the results were displayed? They were up there. Okay, great. Thank you. So with that, I would like each of our four panelists to briefly introduce themselves, describing where they're from, the organization that they're working with and perhaps previously worked with, and some of the kinds of work that they're doing. Just 3 or 4 sentences from each of you to introduce yourself, which would be much better than my trying to do it. And then we'll call upon each of them to come up and make a presentation, to be followed by questions from the JPAC and the TEK-EG group, and from all of those of you in the public. So it should be a very good session, one where I'm sure all of us, including myself, will be learning along the way. And we are very fortunate to have these speakers. And we'll start out with Ayalo, who works for the CEC and was stranded on his way to this meeting, I believe in New York area, and will, I hope, join us by the end of the day if his flights work out for him. Welcome.
Thank you, Bob. I'm trying to catch up a flight probably this afternoon. So, but anyway, my name is Paolo Solano. I'm Director of Legal Affairs and the Submissions on Enforcement Matters process. You may hear from time to time announcements and the like from the airport, but I would like to talk about the submissions process and how this is carried out in the CEC context, and of course in the access to information context in environmental justice. Muchas gracias, Bob.
Thank you. Next, Ali.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Aliénor Rougeau, or Ali, if that's easier to pronounce. I'm usually based in Toronto, Canada, which is on Treaty 13, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Mississauga people. And I work for Environmental Defense Canada. We're a national advocacy organization, and I'll be speaking a bit more about what I do there in a minute. But I also wanted to share with you that prior to doing this paid work, advocacy work, I am a movements person. I did many years of unpaid organizing around climate justice. And so that's kind of what brought me up to speed on really the issues around environmental justice and really educated me into understanding intersectionality, as we've been discussing already throughout the morning. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ali. Amanda?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Hoff. I work for the United States Environmental Protection Agency. During my whole career, I've been working on environmental justice, community, and tribal and Native American affairs. I've worked on toxic release inventory program, data analytics and data analysis, how communities can look at facilities and exposures and other public health areas of importance. I've also worked on toxic and pesticide exposures, farm worker women and children, Native and Indigenous peoples exposures as well. I'm also working with the colonias and other communities about different exposures, children's health to lead exposure, PFAS, a variety of legacy chemicals. In my new role at the Office of International and Tribal Affairs, I am also working on tribal children's health issues and a variety of environmental justice issues as well. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about the overall policy perspectives for the United States and then some of our work that we have at the agency.
Erica?
Nehuano toca Erika, Nochanal Tepel Cuentepec. Buenos días, mi nombre es Erika.
Good morning, my name is Erika. I'm from the Nahuatl community of Ecuantepec. And I'm also co-founder of Coatepec. We are in defense of the territories. Likewise, I also work with the topic of environmental health in my maternal language, which is Nahuatl. And I'm also part of the collective which rehabilitates the language Nahuatl and the Nahuatl culture. And I'm also an indigenous person which is in the defense of the territory in my community. At the same time, we are allied with other communities in order to be stronger and continue defending the land. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And to ensure that you don't miss your flight, we will start with Paolo. Thank you so much for being here. And as he indicated, he is director of the SEM unit at the CEC, has extensive experience working on SEM issues, enforcement of environmental laws in the 3 countries, doing outreach with various parties, and it's wonderful to have him here with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks for everyone to accommodate me in this panel under this circumstance. And I mean, I'll try to catch up with the rest of the people tonight. But in the meantime, I'll try to explain a little bit how the submissions on enforcement matters process works and how this is connected to environmental justice discussion. There's no doubt that access to environmental information is a key aspect of environmental justice. Very recently, the Latin American countries adopted the Escazú agreement, which one important aspect of it is access to environmental justice. So if we go to the next slide, please. The CEC was established in 1994 under the North American Agreement on Environmental Cooperation. Well, this agreement contained an important element of access to environmental information, which is the submissions on enforcement matters process. The same process starts with what we call a submission. The submission is a written document. It's filed by anyone, by any citizen, resident, organization in North America, where it asserts that a party is failing to enforce their environmental law. And all this terminology, environmental law, submission, all this is defined in the respective. That was defined in the NEAC by 1994. Now, with the arrival, with the signature of the new USMCA CUSMA-TIMEC, the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the same process was moved from the side agreement, which was the environmental agreement, into the trade agreement. It continues under Chapter 24 of the USMCA CUSMA. It contains exactly the same provisions, exactly the same process. There's very little variances, which I'm not going to talk about. We don't have enough time. But if we go to the next slide, I want to show you how the submissions process works. The process, as I said, it starts with a submission. And at that moment, we make a determination whether that submission is admissible, it meets the admissibility criteria. And we also make a decision on whether that submission merits a response from the government in question. There's a number of criteria that we need to follow and consider in making that decision. Once we send this decision to the government, the determination to the government in question, along with the submission and the annexes and all the supporting information, the government has 60 days to provide an official response. The response normally comes with information about what they are doing in terms of enforcement. It can come with other aspects around enforcement. It also, and when it's the case, notifies that there is a pending proceeding, in which case we may partially or totally stop the submission or terminate the submission. But normally the response gives the party the opportunity to address environmental justice issues that are raised in a submission, which again is about the effective enforcement of the environmental laws. Now, with this submission and the response in hand, we make a second decision, which is whether or not we recommend the council, which is the three ministers, the three governments, whether or not we recommend the preparation of a factual record. And in considering this, we look into the submission assertions, the documents that were provided in the submission, and also the response, and whether the response is addressing effectively the issues on enforcement that the submission is raising. So I don't want to go into much more into the details and the little bits of the aspects of the process. What I would like to do is to present in the next slide, on the next following slides, different submissions that we have had in the past. Some of them are actually, most of them are ongoing. The one that was recently closed because we published a factual record is the loggerhead submission. In the case of the submission, this was filed in 2020 by SEMDA and the CBD in the United States. By the way, SEMDA filed in 1995 the first submission that went to factual record. So by filing this submission under the USMCA, they again made history in becoming the organization that filed a submission that made to factual record, which is the loggerhead turtle. Now, in the case of the loggerhead turtle, what we were looking at is the high mortality rate of the turtle, which lives next to the coast of the Pacific, in the Pacific Ocean. The loggerhead migrates from Japan, spends about 30 years in the Pacific, and also reaches some of the population reaches the Mexican coast in the Baja region. What happened is that researchers start noticing a high mortality rates of the loggerhead, and some of the hypotheses are around the fishing activities that probably the loggerhead were stranded in the area due to the fishing activities. So one of the aspects that we addressed is not only we presented information about the loggerhead, about the mortality, about numbers, about years, but we also were able to gather information around the number of inspections, the number of inspectors, and the death specimens over the years. And one of the graphs that we presented shows that high numbers of death specimens of the loggerhead occurred where we had less inspectors and less trips or less site visits from the inspectors in the area. There are other explanations to this. There are other hypotheses, but this is one that we presented in the factual record. Please go ahead to the next slide. One of the challenges that we have in implementing the submissions process is access to environmental information. And one of the reasons that submitters come to this process is to access environmental information, to have the opportunity to participate in the effective enforcement of environmental law, but also to present and to be able to obtain environmental information. One of the challenges that the process has is actually obtaining this information from governments. Right now, we recommended, this was the situation in the case of the loggerhead. Actually, if you look at the loggerhead factual record, most of the references and most of the information was obtained thanks to the transparency mechanisms under the Mexican law. the Environmental Cooperation Agreement and the USMCA has access to information mechanisms, but sometimes what we found is much more effective to go through the domestic mechanisms to access information. So now what we're looking now is the North Atlantic right whale submission. This was filed in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, by Oceana, which is an organization based in the United States. What the submitter says in this submission is that the U.S. is failing to effectively enforce U.S. environmental laws related to two aspects, basically speed limits, and which connects to vessel strikes and entanglement with fishing gear. The North Atlantic right whale is one of the most endangered large whale species in the world. Fishing gear entanglement are the principal human cause source of the right whale mortality, and it's a cause also of serious injury. One of the and in this case, I have to clarify, we haven't moved into the development of a factual record. We are right now awaiting the council decision whether or not to go ahead with the factual record. The latest estimates suggest that there are fewer than 250 of these right whales in the region, fewer than 70 breeding females. So again, this is another opportunity where we will have to look into a marine species. One of the aspects that maybe is worth to underscore that this is the first submission that will go, if voted in favor, will be the first submission on factual record addressing the U.S. law enforcement, which I think is interesting. Next, please. Next one. Another interesting submission that we have in front of us is the vaquita porpoise. This submission was filed actually by 4 environmental advocacy groups in the United States. The submission wasn't filed by Mexican groups; it was filed by American organizations. And now one feature of this process is that allows anyone in North America to file a submission with respect to any of the parties of the treaty. So you may be based in Mexico, but there's a situation that concerns your organization in the United States. You may file a submission with respect to that situation in the United States. This is the case of the vaquita porpoise that is filed by 4 U.S. organizations with respect to Mexico. Now, the main assertion of this submission, the submitters, is that Mexico is failing to effectively enforce environmental laws to protect the vaquita porpoise, which decline is caused by the totuaba fishing, the bycatch in the illness of the totuaba. Now, totuaba is being fished because of its bladder. It's a valuable fish. It's a valuable fishery in China, and actually, this fishery is illegal. It's banned in Mexico. But because of the characteristics and the distribution of the totuaba is the same size, about the same size of the vaquita, and the distribution happens to be in the same location. So this illegal fishing is causing the vaquita to go into almost extinction stage. This world's smallest cetacean is endangered. It's listed in Mexico, but it's also listed by other international mechanisms. It's the smallest range of any whale, dolphin, or porpoise. It lives only in 1,500 square miles area in the Mexico's upper Gulf of California. The CEC Secretary that recommended the development of a factual record in 2022. We are working closely with the parties to obtain a favorable decision to develop a factual record. And if this happens, well, one of the products of this process is actually provide information. Next slide, please. Now, the avocado production in Michoacán is a very, I would say, one very, very interesting submission. It addresses the environmental law enforcement of forest protection and water resources in Michoacán from deforestation, which is caused by the continued expansion of avocado plantations. About 90,000 hectares in Michoacán has been deforested between 2001 and 2017. This increased to a rate of 30,000 hectares or more in 2022, which is quite alarming. The avocado production is estimated to drive or to at least explain 30 to 40% of the deforestation in the state. In 2022, the Secretariat recommended development of factual record. We are, as I noted, we are awaiting a council decision on this. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. And I'm just going to list the 9 active submissions that we are at this moment. One of them comes from the former North American Agreement on Environmental Cooperation, the hydraulic fracturing. We are submitting a draft factual record actually this week on the hydraulic fracturing. The rest are in front of the council, which are pending council members' instructions. Hopefully they come soon. And please go to my last slide. It's basically a chart of the number of the number of submissions that we have had in the history of the SAM process: 114, 64 from Mexico, 34 from Canada, 14 US, 2, which is in the case of not very common case, 2 binational submission addressing United States and Canada. So far, we have published 27 factual records. We are hoping to publish soon the 28th factual record, which will be the hydraulic fracturing. And with this, I conclude. I'm being asked to speed up my presentation. So thank you very much, and good luck to the rest of the participants. Muchas gracias.
Next is Ali. Welcome.
Sure, thanks, Paolo. Hi again, everyone. So just waiting for the slides to come up. I'm going to be talking about one of the past SEM processes which led to a factual record, which was in the case of the Albertan tar sands in northern Canada. So we can actually go to the next slide. You've met me already. I was just sharing with you earlier a bit of my background. I'm a climate and energy program manager at Environmental Defense Canada. I know there's also an Environmental Defense Fund in the US. We are not affiliated with each other. We sound very similar. Don't talk to me about rebranding. It's a no, but I know it's confusing. So Environmental Defense Canada mostly does advocacy. So we're trying to push public policies to better protect the environment. We work on issues, of course, like addressing climate change, building a clean economy, but also kicking out toxins from our products and from our communities, addressing plastic pollution, protecting biodiversity. And specifically, I work on the issue of ensuring that the energy transition is just for workers and communities. So on one hand, that might look like advocating for legislations or support programs for the workers and communities impacted by the loss of revenue associated with a fossil fuel phase out. On the other hand, it also means making sure that those who are currently affected, who are on the front lines of fossil fuel harm, gets justice, and we don't see companies pack up their bags and leave without paying the price and cleaning up, which we know happens and we know could keep happening if we're not advocating for a different outcome. Next slide, please. So just a brief agenda. I'm going to be giving you a bit of context or a reminder if you're already familiar with the tar sands. And then I really want to tell you how we've used the SEM process, the benefits that we've seen, and also the shortcomings. So hopefully this can inform some of our conversations. Next slide, please. So the tar sands. I mean, maybe just a raise of hands. Have you ever heard of the Canadian tar sands? Right. They were very infamous and made headlines decades ago. And then Canada's managed, I guess, to get them out of the headlines a bit more recently. We've seen it way less. Unfortunately, they have not gone away and been cleaned up or stopped production. Actually, production has ramped up. So tar sands, for the few of you that didn't raise your hand, are one form of oil reserve. It's different from the conventional oil, right? It's when the sand, clay, water, and bitumen are all mixed together in some viscous substance. And to produce this oil out of the tar sands is extremely polluting, extremely carbon intensive, first of all, because the production process requires a lot more energy, as well as just itself being more emitting than other forms of oil, which you know are already extremely carbon intensive. So here you can see on this graph that the Canadian tar sands are way more carbon intensive than many other forms of oil. So that's one first issue with it, right, around climate impact. But next slide, please. There's a lesser known or maybe lesser talked about impact, which is how locally destructive they are. The tar sands are on Treaty 8, which is the traditional territory of Cree, Denesutlane, and Métis nations, who are indigenous nations to that territory. As you have heard in my introduction, I'm not from any of those nations, so I can't speak on their behalf, but we've been working closely with some of their leadership and some of their community, and so their input and their experience informs the work we do. And so these nations have been telling us that, have been painting the picture for us of how destructive the tar sands are, and I'm going to try to share that a bit with you. To get oil from the tar sands, you don't just put some sort of tube down, it comes out, and that's it through the pipeline. First of all, you have to basically bulldoze through pristine boreal forest and wetlands. And that's the first step, is clearing that extremely ecologically and culturally significant area. And then you have to use massive, massive trucks. And I can't emphasize how massive these trucks are. They are the size of a house. I am smaller than one of their tires. Like, these are huge trucks that just dig up the earth and go and process that. And so they take that substance I was telling you about and flush liters of fresh water through it to separate the oil from the sand. And so, of course, on one end you get bitumen, but on the other side you get trillions of liters of water that is now contaminated with the oil that it was just in contact with. And so, after decades and decades of mining, we have 900 square kilometers of boreal forest completely decimated, but we also have 1.3 trillion liters of toxic sludge that's remaining of this industrial wastewater. And what did they do with this industrial wastewater? Well, because thankfully industry was not allowed to just release it directly into the environment, they've just been digging basically just very large holes in the ground and putting the sludge there. Those are not lined sort of pools, these are just holes in the ground. And I'm not really exaggerating it. If you've been there, that are storing these. And the industry likes to call them tailings ponds. You hear this in other mining industries as well, tailings ponds. That has nothing to do with a good little English garden pond. These tailings ponds are actually the size of entire lakes. We tried to, show a bit more the size. We put all those tailings ponds together, put them over a map of the city of Paris. If you can see, just the inner circles there is the entire city of Paris. So they would be 3 times larger than the city of Paris if you had to put them all over. So in all of this, what's the impact on local environment, local communities? Well, the indigenous communities that live downstream have been reporting for decades serious health concerns, rare cancers, respiratory diseases, as well as unquantifiable amounts of devastation in terms of their relationship to that land and their ability to practice their traditional practices, because that land is now completely devastated. This, of course, is environmental racism at its worst. It's us putting something that we would never accept anywhere else in a community in an indigenous community in this case. And so let's go to the next slide, please. I'd like to tell you just a little reminder, because we're here talking about cross boundaries, that a lot of Canadian oil doesn't stay in Canada. Most of it actually goes to the US. And so if you want to talk more about that relationship that those countries have and where that oil goes and how maybe cross-border solidarity could be better built here, I would love to have those conversations afterwards. So next slide, please. Where does this SEM process come into? Well, as I was telling you, those tailings ponds, those huge lakes, have no lining to prevent leakage. And so it's well documented, and the communities that are there knew for decades that leak is taking place, that this toxic waste is reaching the environment. And, you know, the communities, environmental experts, physicians were saying that they felt this was a violation of one of Canada's environmental laws, the Fisheries Act. So the Fisheries Act is one of our last few remaining protections for freshwater after a previous government really decimated all of the other freshwater protection. And this law basically says you can't put toxic stuff in a place where there's fish or there could be fish. That's my non-legal version of what the law actually says. And so in June 2017, we joined forces with a few other folks. We joined forces with the Natural Resource Defense Council and an individual called Daniel Taselli, who's a Dene from Fort Good Hope, Northwestern Territories. And we put forward a submission to the CEC. And we argued that the government of Canada was failing to enforce the pollution preventions in the Fisheries Act by allowing the companies to leak their toxic tailings and not prosecuting them. That was our argument. We were saying that the government was failing to enforce it by not charging the companies. And so what we were looking for in this request was really information. As Paolo was saying, that's really one of the benefits. We wanted to know, is the Fisheries Act not being properly enforced? And so next slide, please. We got, you know, following our request, first of all, we were really happy that the Secretariat and then the Council decided to move forward with writing a factual record. So that process that you just saw, we were told that we would get a factual record, and that was really important for us. However, the Council, so the three governments, said the factual record can't be on all the things that the submitters asked. It can't be on whether, so it could only be, on whether the tailings were leaking and whether existing programs by local governments were covering Canada's responsibility to enforce the Fisheries Act or not. But in short, the Council didn't authorize the Secretariat to really look into whether the enforcement was sufficient. And that, as you can imagine, is a key barrier to the information that we were seeking. They weren't really allowed to say yes or no, the enforcement is happening at a sufficient scale. So we didn't get clarity on that, but some of the things we did get were really strong, robust science that confirmed that the tailings ponds, those toxic lakes, are leaking into the environment and are reaching way beyond those boundaries that the industry is allowed to operate in. We got that confirmation through the factual record by an independent scientist hired by the CEC. We got evidence that industry had information of that because the CEC was able to obtain information from industry, so we knew industry knew. And the factual record gave us clarity on why Canada was not enforcing its Fisheries Act. That was also important for us because before it was a black box. We would just say, why are you not enforcing it? And we would just be told this is a legal matter and we can't talk to you. So at least we got more clarity there. Next slide, please. So to confirm, as I was just saying, we didn't get this clarity on yes or no, is Canada enforcing the Fisheries Act? And that really is a shame, and perhaps one of the limitations of this process in our case is that key answer was not there. However, one of the most important pieces that we got was really broad media coverage back then and still now, 3 years after the factual record came out, being able to point to an independent, credible source, confirming, validating what communities on the ground had been saying for decades. And just wrapping it up here, to leave space to my other panelists, I did want to say also that in terms of the perhaps other limitations or things we can think of improving on, we noticed that Canada and some of its other government agencies weren't very familiar with the CEC and the weights that it had behind it. So we had to do a lot of education of our own government to explain that weight. And so perhaps something to improve is, as we get those excellent factual records, making sure that that can really be backed up with governments taking it as seriously as it really is. So thank you, and I look forward to our discussion afterwards.
Thank you, Ali. Amanda?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you an overview of some of the policy and legal perspectives in the United States. I will go over some brief policy items, and then I'll go into a few tools. I'm not going to be able to cover everything, so happy to have more follow-up on that in the next time. You can skip to slide 3. So the United States has put environmental justice into the center of everything that we do to protect and address issues such as health impacts, environmental impacts, and economic impacts for communities. In 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, which launched this ambitious environmental agenda for all of the federal government. And also in that executive order, it recognizes that all Americans deserve to live on healthy and safe places and have safe communities, safe playgrounds, and a variety of perspectives available to folks. One of the key pillars of environmental justice is to encourage and facilitate public participation and have open dialogue between the government and our citizens. As a result, an advisory board was created at the White House level to bring together environmental justice advocates and leaders, and the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council ensures the voices of overburdened communities are heard and reflected in policies and the activities that we do in our federal agencies. For example, they have several work groups right now. One's focused on carbon management, climate planning, and also preparedness and response and recovery. And then also we have a committee on Indigenous peoples and tribal affairs. And all of that is working towards providing recommendations for improving agency policies, programs, and decision makings. Also, there is a White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, which is an internal government body that is made up of key federal agencies that seek to advance environmental justice and develop strategies to advance current and historical environmental injustices. For the first time also, our nation has looked at our government and looked at all the programs that we have and have focused 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal programs focused on climate, energy, affordable and sustainable housing, and other investments for underserved communities. And so the goal of this Justice 40 initiative is to transform programs to prioritize the need of communities, as well as these programs look and are supported by new funding under the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan. But a lot of other investments have gone through there, and I'm not going to have time to go to that. But really focusing on what are the needs of communities, what are the areas that we can have 40% of the benefits, the outcomes, the activities, everything to support community needs across the federal government. In addition to that, they've established an environmental justice scorecard. And this scorecard was created to help us be accountable for what we're executing, what are the programs that we're doing, what's the work actually happening on the ground, evaluating what are the environmental burdens that the communities are dealing with, delivering clean energy, and then also undertaking community input and having communities be a part of everything that we do and accomplish. Another way that we're also accountable and holding ourselves accountable is and also overseeing the things that we're doing is we are building environmental justice strategic plans. So federal agencies are looking at what are they doing every day, where can they work with other federal agencies and combine resources, how can we work with our tribal partners and Indigenous peoples, how can we identify priorities and activities and also use all of this to reach this environmental justice goals and objectives as a whole. In addition to that, several agencies have launched new environmental justice and equity offices for the first time, or have expanded where they are and what they're doing. So for example, I'm in a new position that was created for the agency, focusing on Indigenous peoples, tribal affairs, international issues on environmental justice. Doesn't say we haven't done great work, but it's exciting to be in this new role. In addition to that, one example is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They stood up a commission on equity, and they just received 66 recommendations from the communities. And so they're looking to unpack that and work on that. So if you want to find that, that shows some of the work that we've been doing on the ground. Next slide, please. I just wanted to take some time to introduce a few of our legal tools that are used by EPA practitioners. First is the EPA's legal tools to advance environmental justice. This was published in May of 2022. This, in looking at what we do as an agency, EPA is a regulatory agency. We develop rules, we assess risk, and then we provide mitigation areas and activities to reduce that risk. And so prioritizing rulemaking to protect the health and well-being of vulnerable communities is essential for addressing environmental justice and what we do at EPA, but also for the whole government in the United States. This legal tool document highlights environmental and civil rights statutes that EPA implements and also focuses on our human health and environmental perspectives for communities. So our practitioners and folks, I welcome you to open up this document, can look at our agency priorities, our programs, look at the statutes that guide us. So for example, looking at Water, Clean Air Act, a variety of Toxic Substance Control Act, and what are the principles and what are the statutes that are guiding us, but how can we look at that to include environmental justice perspectives? So this is a tool for our practitioners to look at the actual environmental statutes that we're implementing and what we can do to better extend and have relationships that make meaningful changes. So this comes from all the way from public policy, working with folks on the ground, looking at the statutes, analyzing where the statutes allow for public participation, also looking at technical information, how can we look at susceptible subpopulations, exposures to fish consumption, a variety of different things and vulnerabilities to populations. In addition to that, it highlights current standards and practices that we're doing at the agency and how to expand that as well. Next slide. In the tool itself, as you noted, or as I can say, there's the Clean Air Program, there's a pesticide and toxics, there's the tribal program, there's a variety of civil rights perspectives that you can go through. In the tool, we've incorporated environmental justice considerations and examples for folks, but also we outlined the agency standards. So for example, when we're looking at water quality, looking at the protection of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, looking at how water criteria protects the human health and consumption of fish, but also where are the rates that we are now. And we know that we've had several conversations and we're working in different committees on exposure to fish consumptions, salmon exposure, things like that. And what does that look like in real life, how we can better protect our communities. Also, chapter 5 has an overview of the tribal programs, how we conduct tribal consultation, how we look at tribal treaty rights, and also how we have different statutory authorities that our tribes and our states implement, and working with those folks as well to implement things on the ground. Next slide, please. In May of 2022, we added a cumulative impacts addendum. So this addendum was focused on identifying and addressing cumulative impacts on communities with environmental justice concerns. It also provides detail and analysis on EPA legal authorities that allow us to look at cumulative impacts and then also look at specific examples and issues that are happening. In addition to that, it looks at different ways that we can work with our states, our programs, our communities. For example, one item is our state solid waste management criteria, looking at state solid waste and how can we build a criteria to be better protective, maybe including population density, looking at diversity of exposures, looking at social, economic, and demographic risk factors, and how can we work with our state partners to address those on the ground and improve the criteria that states also implement as well. Next slide. The next guidance that I want to talk to you about is the technical guidance for assessing environmental justice in regulatory analysis. This is designed to help EPA analysts evaluate potential EJ concerns as they're associated with environmental justice and regulatory perspectives. It really encourages our analysts to look at what the statutes are looking at, look at our decision making. Are there baseline environmental justice issues that are happening? How do we analyze that? And then how do we ask ourselves key questions about concerns? So for example, are there different regulatory actions that we're taking that are affecting communities? Are there different ways that we can change criteria where we are creating management ways to improve exposure or improve the way that we regulate issues that are happening on the ground? And how can we include public participation, risk that's happening on the ground? And then in addition to that, look at qualitative and quantitative data. So with data issues, we know that it's not just always these data standards that are at these high scientific frameworks, which is what is needed for going into the EPA's risk assessment processes. But how can we look at data for screening methodologies? How can we look at data for qualitative and quantitative methodologies? So there's different examples that we've been able to do. And then also, how can we build that into our rule and regulatory assessments? Next slide, please. I also wanted to mention human impact assessments. So this is another tool that can support the understanding and consideration of health impacts in environmental justice. This really looks at environmental, social, and economic factors. This is a tool for beginners all the way to folks that are advanced. It helps you outline what you should be considering, what are the practices going on, how are their program objectives and policies affecting communities on the ground, how can you make sure that the health and well-being of the programs are informed by people on the ground, and also make sure that the outcomes and impacts are beneficial and useful. So this is another tool for folks as well. There is a resource and kit available. I don't have much time, but there's a variety of benefits. It talks about how do you work with stakeholders, how do you look at the data perspectives, also providing evidence and recommendations for the decision making, both at the community level, but also internally as you're a practitioner working with governments and others. Next slide, please. I just briefly wanted to mention environmental justice screening and mapping tools. As you know, mapping tools and analysis are being used to visualize data. There are a lot of positive perspectives that come out of this, but there are a lot of negative perspectives as well. Practitioners need to be aware that the activities and things that they put in these screening tools can and do and may affect communities. In addition to that, some of these data sets that are used are scenario data sets or they're screening data sets. And so for that, how can we make sure that we're utilizing these in an appropriate manner to help us know where we need to go, help us understand the issues, but not have them be a decision-making tool by themselves. For example, they leave out tribal population perspectives. They might leave out community issues that are happening on the ground. So how do we do that? But there are some examples where we are doing it well and making progress. Under the Justice 40 initiative, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool is used to help agencies figure out where they can focus on community issues. And then also EJ Screen, which is really robust, has several indices that compare different demographic and social perspectives, such as housing, lead-based paint, exposure to different perspectives. So kind of guide you there. There's also how-to guides to use and how to analyze geospatial data. Next slide. Funding and technical assistance has always been the foundation and need for our community partners. There's been a lot of funding that's come through. We have worked on a variety of programs, some to solve problems where the communities already know what's going on. The communities solve the problems and we provide resources as needed. Others, we work with our government to government and have them as well, those folks execute and provide solutions. So we work with our tribes, our states, and our local government. And in addition to that, we have these new technical assistance centers, which help everyone provide understanding of the navigation of how to deal with grants for the federal agency, but also state and local grants. So I would advise folks to go find those centers to ask questions. In addition to that, I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing with our tribes and indigenous peoples. The agency has a policy on environmental justice for working with federally recognized tribes and indigenous peoples. There's 17 principles of what we're trying to work on, but we're going to revise that based off of some great work that we've been doing with our tribes, but also some of the new federal guidances. As you guys know, the guidance on indigenous knowledge, sacred sites, and then other things that we've had over the years working with our tribal partners to look at exposure to fish consumptions, protections of plants and animals with pesticides, a variety of exposures there. So we intend to revise that and welcome any type of collaboration that you would like to do as well. So that is my time and I will yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Erica, welcome.
So I'm going to share part of the experience from the indigenous perspective for the Cuentepec indigenous population. This is the environmental justice for indigenous peoples and how we can understand this statement. Environmental justice is environmental justice for indigenous peoples. So at the end, we will be able to understand how deep this statement is. As we mentioned, as the previous speaker said, the indigenous people are the guardians of 80% of the current biodiversity in the world. We can understand that the indigenous communities have kept this harmonious balance between nature and human beings. So the question is what's environmental justice? We can have different comments or stands in terms of environmental justice, but for indigenous peoples, have they been asked what environmental justice means? What is the way they feel about environmental justice and how this word has an impact in their territories and lands? In order to talk about the different indigenous peoples' perspectives, we need to look at different ways of looking at environmental justice, and this goes hand in hand with environmental justice. We have justice principles in the indigenous communities which have been preserved and enforced over the years. One of these is the free self-determination on our territories. Indigenous peoples have gathered for many years and organized themselves. And one thing that is unique is the meeting agreements. This is a gathering where we reach agreements and the decisions are made collectively. This also has to do with what we want in our lands to happen, and we also base on the community statutes and as well as our ejido laws, and everything is legitimized by the indigenous peoples. Now let's go to the specifics of the environmental justice principles and how the indigenous peoples have enforced these environmental justice regulations. We preserve most of our biodiversity, but we are very vulnerable to mega projects that want to be implemented in our area. This is the case in our community. It is threatened by the mining industry, but it's threatened by foreign companies. In 2013, the foreign mining companies, Esparza Silver, Alamos Gold, and Zacatecas Silver, got a concession for 15,000 hectares for an open pit mining project. As a community, we cannot accept such a mining project because this means that this open pit practice will be taking away our territory, because in order to get half a gram of silver and gold, 1 ton of earth has to be withdrawn or removed. And this not only does this affect indigenous communities, but other communities as well. And especially because these first concessions that were granted are in a sacred hill, our sacred hill. And we have crops, and we have the practice of ancestral rituals. And in addition to this, there is an archaeological site near the mining site, and this archaeological site's name is Xochicalco. Well, the communities have organized with other communities and have partnered with other communities because this is a climate catastrophe, and we can understand that everyone is accountable for climate change, but we also have to understand that this responsibility is differentiated because we are not all having a negative impact on our earth, and this is the case of the mining industry. The mining industry is the one that is destroying our planet with these mega projects, which involves water pollution, earth pollution, soil pollution, and destruction of ancestral cultures such as the Cuentepec. The Cuentepec still remains with their, keeps their traditions and keeps the Nahuatl language at a 99% rate, and we still keep our traditions, our traditional clothes, and we as indigenous communities gather to talk about these issues and to make decisions collectively. We gather and we have gathered and we have stated that we do not want the mining activity in our territory. The mining industry started in our land without asking us. We have decided that we don't want our sacred hills to be destroyed. The people from that community would like to continue with their agricultural activities, with traditional medicine, with preservation of their festivities and sacred rituals. Also, other activities such as pottery, and we have a very, very rich culture, and because of that, we decided to have self-determination on our territory because we don't want other people to decide on our lands, as the government has done for many years. So we decided to have a gathering of Nahuatl peoples in the state of Morelos, and right there we had some working groups, and we shared our the way we felt and thought about the mining industry. And during these 2 days, several communities from Mexico attended this meeting. And this is the way we always decide to create our own laws and regulations. We create a decree of law that involves banning the mining industry on the 24th of April 2012. What does this decree say? With the support based on the inalienable right we enjoy as communities and as Nahuatl people to govern our own destiny, we want to establish our development priorities and to conserve and protect our lands, territories, organization, and culture within a framework of autonomy and based on Articles 1, 2, 27, and 39 of the Political Constitution of the United Mexican States, and Convention number 169 of the International Labour Organization concerning indigenous and tribal peoples in dependent countries, as well as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So that's how we based our laws and regulations that have been already passed at an international level to support our right to ban the mining activity in our land. And in order to change this perspective and to have other people speaking on behalf of the indigenous communities, saying that the indigenous peoples are life options because we manage our own lands, we are autonomous, we have free self-determination, and the indigenous communities are capable of creating their own rules and regulations in their own territories, which have to be enforced and respected by others. So that is the purpose of this law. This law has to be enforced and respected by the different actors and should be validated as well, because we have already validated all these rules and regulations, and we want this to be acknowledged by the government, and we want to see this in practice, and we want our rules and regulations to be enforced and respected as a whole. So I'm open for any comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Erica. And I think one overriding thing that I see here with our panel is three very dedicated, and four very dedicated individuals who have taken this issue very seriously, who have made great progress, who have truly made a difference in people's lives, and who I know are continuing that effort, and we're going to continue to see good things happening. And one other thing that I'll say is that it's been very refreshing to see the amount of resources that have been put into environmental justice recently with outreach and education. One can argue that there's never enough, and that's probably true. But if we can continue this effort to bring people together, to communicate, to address issues where sometimes there's a blatant disregard for the law, sometimes there's a disregard for the area that you're impacting, and the rights and concerns of those people, and the need to get out and communicate. People have certain perceptions, and sometimes when you can sit down and talk and better understand how you can work through an issue, how in some cases the legal requirements may have been met, but there are remaining issues of concern that with communication can be worked out, or where the impacts can be lessened, or where there may be opportunities to collaborate and find ways to make things better, not only in that instance, but in the future. I'm also pleased to see that we truly have some young environmental leaders in the room, such as one over there, who's have been terrific all day, incredibly quiet, obviously not related to anyone in my family. My grandchildren are quite active and quite vocal. So thank you so much for bringing your child along today, and most welcome. So thank you. We do have time for just a few questions, and we're going to move to that in just a moment. But I also want to make sure you're aware that if we don't get to any questions that you may have, that you're invited during the lunch to sit with our panelists today and have a chance to ask them one-on-one at the luncheon. So if we don't get to all of the questions now, and I'm sure we probably won't, given our limited time, we have a hard stop at 12 noon with the folks who are providing the lunch. So we urge you to not be discouraged, and please feel free to ask them about their presentation, about their work, or for any clarifications that you may need, or just opinions that you want to share with them and with the larger group. And keep in mind too that the JPAC will be taking these presentations to heart. We'll be preparing a letter of advice to the three nations, the EPA, Environment Canada, and Seminar leadership. And so it really does matter. And we welcome your ideas, your reactions, your thoughts, and potential things that could be incorporated into our advice that we provide. But before we go to the general public, I did want to turn to the JPAC and the TEK expert group that are here with us today, and ask if they have any questions. Please feel free to raise your hand or step to the microphone to ask your question. Felicia, thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations, but also for your very good and heartfelt, as well as strategic work. It was a wonderful way to spend a chunk of the morning. And this may be it's not a trick question, maybe a tough question. You know, as many of you may know, the CEC put out a report on the legal tools in each of the three countries, which you may or may not have had a chance to see. And you gave very different presentations. I'm just curious if you can, are there tools that you've seen in one of the other countries that you wish your country had, or put it any way you want, or tools you wish your country had that don't necessarily? Because I think part of what we'll need to be doing in our advice is making an advice as to how the three countries can look at all of their tools and strengthen each other through the ability to see what each other have done. So I'm just wondering if there are tools you've seen that the other country has, another country or countries have, that you wish all had.
Ellie?
Certainly, I think listening to both the presentations and then specifically seeing that laid out, at least left me wondering to what extent does Canada have to say, and I think this might show some of the limits of my own knowledge on but I think I was certainly wondering for those internal guides, right, the practitioners, people on the inside, I've not had a chance to see if Canada has such an extensive kind of rule book and guidebook. I think that would be really important for us to have, and that transparency of knowing as a public what government inside is told is really important. And then perhaps that'll come up later, but Canada just adopted this law on addressing environmental racism and has to develop a strategy around it. And I certainly would hope that these could be directly informing it so that we don't reinvent the wheel and spend 5 years in consultations redoing what neighbors have done. So big interest for us to do some collaboration there.
I'll go next. I'm seeing a way for all three countries to work together. I talked about data, and there are a lot of data needs to meet scientific thresholds and risk assessment. However, we know that the communities are doing great data on the ground. We know the tribes are doing great data, and we know that each country has data. Some of it overlaps, some of it's separate. But if we start bringing this together to help support the issues, and then also, if there's not data, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist because we know it exists, right? So how do we look at screening methodologies? How do we look at other approaches? How do we leverage what's already happening in practice and make that serve the community needs and the data at that level? So I think that would be a strategic item to look at.
Erica?
Sí.
We as indigenous communities have that opportunity of being able to create in our own laws, but there are other tools that have been made or created in this territory, which is the territory of Morelos, by other movements, by other environmental movements in defense of the territory. And there is another important law, which is diagnosis and evaluation of these mining companies that want to come in, and that it has gone out and it has favored the communities. And I think that these are tools different movements that are being used, and I think that what we are missing, is how to respect that decree, how to respect the community statutes of each community. So I think that we have the tools, but it's just a matter of using them. And the other step is how can we put them into practice and be respected? Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I was going to perhaps make a comment about the National Transparency Platform in Mexico. It's an access to information tool that Mexico has, and it has been in place for about probably 25, 30 years now. It has, it has gone through different transformations, but the National Transparency Platform, we've been using it for the development of factual records to access environmental information and to make transparent environmental information. I see that as, one of the most effective tools, at least to gather and to obtain information. Most of the submitters come with information that has been obtained through the platform. It's called PNT in Mexico in Spanish. And I mean, we haven't seen at least something of that robustness or that capacity in the other countries. It has timelines that we need to provide, as well as other. This may have this must be in place in other places. But what perhaps one feature of this is that the information is free. You don't need to pay for the documents, you don't need to pay for copies, you don't need to pay for the digitalization of information. This also has a spread over the state legislations. When we developed the City Park factual record, most of the information came from the city government. And I must underscore our ability to access that information, not as an international organization, but as a consultant that was hired to obtain that information. And she was able to go into the room and obtain all the information for another transparency mechanism, which is under the CEC.
Announce your name and affiliation, and then question for each person in line. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? The power of a good presentation is the thoughts that it generates. So thank you so much for all your hard work and presentations this morning. My name's Kathy Hodgson-Smith. I'm Canada's delegate, one of Canada's delegates to the Traditional Ecological Knowledge Group. For me, and I heard you all speak of it, recognizing the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples and protecting Indigenous rights requires process, requires a budget, requires intentionality, as our leader talked about this morning. And as I learn more about the EJ movement, the EJ processes, what comes to mind is how do those principles of sovereignty, self-determination affect the approaches taken under EJ strategies? Now, one of the small projects that we've been working on with the TEKG is the development of a set of North American principles on the approach to recognizing these important concepts of free, prior, and informed consent and, implementation of rights and recognition. And, wondering, is there a role for a North American perspective to assist you in your work? We recognize this overlapping environment context and, how we can assist at CEC, approaches we should be taking, priorities that we should be examining to assist you in your work. So no need for a direct response given the time. My colleagues are behind me, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat.
I think it would be really helpful if you guys would want to provide input as we revise our environmental justice and tribal policy. We want to look at how do we work with tribal, federally recognized tribes, but indigenous peoples. And we're taking a new look at that with the executive orders, but also as we've worked with our tribal partners for many, many years. So I would welcome that. I would be leading that. So welcome to that. And then also, didn't say this, but you kind of did, working with tribes to protect sovereignty and environmental justice. You can't just slap a label of EJ, right? They're separate. There's sometimes that, I talked with my tribal partners, there's the ability for us to use the EJ lens to help us accomplish what we need to do and push things. But then there are completely lines where we say what is not EJ tribal. And so that's where I'm coming into this new role to try to help with that. Also honoring tribal rights, treaty rights, sacred rights, etc. So you didn't exactly say that, but just acknowledging that that is really important as you guys are also looking into that, that you can't just slap an EJ lens on everything that's tribal.
Thank you. Before our next speaker, I just want to also mention, before I forget, because I already did once, that we do have a third poll that we want to put out, and then we'll go back to the public comment. Which legal or policy mechanism do you believe is most crucial for advancing EJ in North America? And the 4 options are A, enforcement of environmental and health laws and regulations, B, encourage public participation in decision-making, C, providing access to legal resources and support, and D, implementing EJ policies to protect vulnerable communities. So that's our poll for this panel. And please, if you get a chance to respond, please do so, and we'll display the results at the end of this session. With that, our next comment.
Gracias. Thank you. Maria del Pilar Garcia Hernandez, representing the TEC EG Group for Mexico. And I think that this topic of environmental justice, the colleague Erica mentioned it very well. Environmental justice, from what perspective, for whom, and how do we see it? How does each one of the sectors assumes it? And specifically, I think that it unites us in the 3 countries that all human beings, not only all living beings, not only humans, that we deserve an environment free of contaminants. This is life. I would like to ask Erika specifically that, yes, she gave a series of legal instruments. These are rights that already exist and has assumed in international agreements. But I think that when we have to implement them in the communities, it has an impact more the decisions. We have a better impact with the decisions of opening these exploitations. She talked about the mining that Morelos has had with the permits for extraction. So the specific question is, how much with those community agreements have you had of that appropriation of your own territory, that we had the right with all that legal frame that exists? How much progress have you made? How much does the government has stopped these authorizations that have an impact on the communities? After the declaration of this decree, the mining company has not started the exploitation, but they have made a lot of research in the territory, and they have opened tracks in ancestral territories. And thanks to this decree and other legal tools from other communities, it hasn't been granted the permit to this company to start the exploitation. So I think that the challenge here is not only to prevent, to give them a permit, to give a permit to the company.
Empresas, precisamente.
And there's companies that are from Canada.
Sino más bien
But here, the objective of the community
es que se quiten
is to get rid of the concessions that have been granted through the government in the country.
aquí el
So here, the challenge is not only to be preventing that they don't start their exploitation process, but that the territory is only for the communities, because they are the ones that work and protect this territory. So these have been the main difficulties that we have had, because these concessions are granted for 50 years or for the opportunity of renovating other 50 years of exploiting. And
actualmente
currently,
el sexenio anterior
with the previous administration, they said that they were not going to give any more permits for mining projects. But we still had that doubt. So what happens with the territories that have been under concession, and we still had that constant threat that they grant that permit? We are in a change of administration, so there is a lot of tension of which company of that company will be obtaining the permit again, because they're working in the communities in order to reach their purpose. So I think that we still are missing that general strategy. And that space has been a lot to see that these communities are resisting. And we do not only want to prevent that permit, but that the territory can be completely owned by those of us who are there. So there are many difficulties still, and we still have the resistance of the communities, and to appropriate these to these spaces. And it's not easy to reach these spaces. So we still need a lot for those countries to make pressure on the Mexican government and the Secretariat of Economy in order to prevent these permits and prevent the contamination of these ancestral communities.
Thank you for giving me time. It's not easy for me. English is my second language. I've been in this political world for almost all my life. Same thing everybody's talking about today. And it's really good because I think we do well as indigenous people of the world, that we protect our way and means and our language and our food and clothing, everything we got from our home, our environment, by taking care of environment in order for it to take care of us. That's how we survive. And good news is when the whale came up back in 70s, the world was alarmed because it was threatened. And they left it up to indigenous people to go ahead and use it the way they always have used it and still protect it. Same thing happened with eagle. We can only one that can practice, pray with our eagle and protect it. We always have. Guess what? They increase. And even try. I think eagle don't need to protect it anymore. I think indigenous people did well. Whale did well. We've proven it, that we can. This development world invaded our country, invaded us. The invader is still in control some area. I've been on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge since 1988. They got their own rules. It's a public interest land. I have to work with that. EPA is new to, EPA is no help all the way through. The pollution had to be there first in order for us to help on EPA. Obama changed that. Obama changed that. It's wonderful what the EPA is all about now. It's happening now. And looks like we could be in control. But still, there's mining, there's oil. That's what I've been have to deal with. Oil as a biggest corporation. It's the biggest issue. It rules the world. We've been doing good because we educate the world in a good way. Why we say no to oil, that helps. And now, the results, I'm not trying to say we're winning because it's not permanent protection yet. But the caribou we're talking about, there's about 10 different herds in the world or more. One of them is porcupine. That's the one we've been fighting. That's increasing. Normal is 300,000. It went down to 129,000. Now it's increasing, even increasing. But all the rest is declining. Some of them are declining fast. So I really believe who is in charge, who took care of it before. And that's just very important as indigenous people of the world. These 3 countries, we have done good. I've been part of this for a while now. And I'm learning, and I know we're all learning, so I think we do a good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. That was great. Esteban, as you know, is here to offer a few comments before we move into the lunch. But the gentleman over here was next in line. Do you have a comment that you can make in 30 or 45 seconds or so before we go? I just want to... Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, if you could stand up, we might be able to hear you, or come to the microphone if you can. Yeah, right there. And there was a young woman back here too. If you have a comment, a brief comment, and then we can follow up in the lunch.
In 45 seconds, I will hardly say my name. But I am a Mexican, live in the US and in Mexico. And I have been working in natural resources management. Now, nobody talks about natural resources. Everything is environment, and people don't know what environment is. Much less people don't know what resilience or resiliencia, the Mexicans say in Spanish. And we have to use Spanish, not imported words or concepts from other languages. We have to define what resiliencia is. That's a mechanical concept. It's not from the environment. Means flexibility in mechanics. That's and the groups that have been En los grupos que han estado afectados.
And the groups that have been negatively impacted face unfairness. They don't know what unfairness is, so they don't know what environmental justice is. They are not aware of these terms, of the terms that bureaucrats use. They are not aware of those terms. So resilience is resistance in Spanish, and this is a word that has to be used because this is what the First Nations and Mexico or Mexicans are familiar with. These are the terms and words used by the communities. They are not aware of the word resilience, but resistance. And we have to be very careful with the words we use and the choice of words, such as justice. We are talking about injustice because there's no justice, so we have to use injustice. All the problems that were stated right here have to do with injustice. They are injustice issues. They are not justice issues. So it's very important that you as authorities are careful when using your words before the audience that is ignorant of these words, but you are aware of, and the audience is aware of all these problems. So I've been in this business for 40 years. The last groups with which I've been working with are the Mayos, indigenous groups from the south of Sonora, the Yaquis from the center of Sonora, and Tohono from the north region in Sonora, all of them facing environmental issues, and they're not aware of what these terms mean. I was the first subdelegate in terms of ecology in Sonora when the deputy secretary was Alicia Bárcenas, who is now the current Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico and future environmental ministry in Mexico. Thank you so much.
Just hopefully very quick comment or question.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. My name is Katia, je suis de Montréal, but I'll ask it in English because I think more people would understand. It's more of a question, so maybe I'll leave it out as an opening question for discussion after. And it was kind of linked to, I guess, the story that Eleonora, you were saying, but I think it kind of relates to everyone's story also. And it's related to kind of the mechanisms that I felt like you really showed how using the CC processes were useful in demonstrating, like in acquiring information and transparency and understanding kind of the environmental injustices that were happening, but maybe not that next step of, okay, now we know that there's a problem, that I guess the Fisheries Act, but then probably way more than the Fisheries Act are being harmed by this. But then what do we do now? Are there other tools, legal mechanisms within the CC or maybe outside the CC that you guys have explored? And if there isn't those mechanisms, what, in your opinion, do we need to implement to go to that next step of actually implementing the reparations and healing the problems that we're exploring? So thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll be following up at the luncheon on that, but I'm glad that we all had a chance to hear your question because it's a very good one and one that we all need to be thinking about. So thank you so much. That's great. And with that, I would like to turn things over to our chairman for today, and he will give you your instructions for lunch. Thank you. Congratulations to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you all.
Muy bien.
Goodbye.
Agradecer a vos.
I would like to thank Bob for being the panel moderator for public policies to have access to environmental justice and enforce it in North America. And thank you very much to Leonor, Amanda, Erica, and Paulo for your presentations. Paulo, we hope you have a safe trip to Wilmington. And we would like to thank all the people that are online. I'm sorry for that. I would like to thank the people that are connected online, that follow us online. There are many questions, and I would like to guarantee you that we will provide those questions to our panel members, most of them women presenters, so we are very happy. So we're going to have lunch next door, and we're going to show how a rural community, Afro-American community got together to prevent toxic waste from being dumped near their houses. We would not be able to show this online, but we will give you a link so you can access that link and see the video. If you are interested in watching this video here in person, you can come back to this room at 12:40. We know that we are running out of time, so we will continue with reports from the national government representatives at 1:15. Thank you very much for your participation and enjoy lunch. We will adjourn later on.
Thank you. Goodbye.